What I'm going to talk about now is the relationship between work on performance and social science research. As Lisa says, I have been engaged in some work involving performance now. I'm doing a project called Performing Abergavenny, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and I'm also working on intergenerational transmission, looking at both a secondary analysis of data, or longitudinal data on women who were born in 1974-75 who were part of the work that was written up in Growing Up Girl, and also working on my own family. I trained not only as a social scientist but also as an artist, so when I'm going to talk about that relationship between those two things, how I'm thinking about and engaging with performance in terms of the practice research tradition that Simon mentioned, as well as a more social scientific tradition. And I think there are, I was trying to think about my own practice across these fields, and so that's what I'm going to try and share with you. I've got some clips. My grasp on the technology isn't always wonderful, and I think I've probably got too many clips, so I may not show all of them. Okay, so I want to begin with a reference to the psychoanalyst Françoise Davoine, whose work is discussed in the paper that I think you have received. Is that right, Rachel? Yeah. And I, in my own research, was very moved and inspired by her work. And in particular, I want to make reference to a paper that she wrote, which talks about the use of work by Antonin Artaud, who worked in the 1920s in theatre and film, and referred to an idea of the double. Now, Françoise Davoine is an analyst who works with psychosis, taking a post-Lacanian approach, which we explain in the paper, so I'm not going to go into it here. But the way that Françoise Davoine uses the idea of a double that's revealed, that Artaud talks about as revealed in theatre, but also as revealed in her clinical practice, is something which spoke to me a great deal. So she engages with the idea in the paper that I'm thinking of here, with a woman who comes to her and says that her mother was taken as part of the resistance during the Second World War, and she never saw her again. But to cut a long story short, what begins to emerge is that her mother was taken because she was Jewish, and not because she was part of the resistance. And what ensues is described by Davoine in a particularly dramatic way, in which another persona emerges from the woman, that she describes as an old Jewish woman, come to remonstrate with her about having been experimented upon by the analyst, and she says that she, Davwan, experienced herself in this as a kind of Hitler-Mengele figure who was then taken to have done this experimenting. And it's in that process that they begin to work out together the story of what happened to her mother. Now, that's a very dramatic way of working or describing her working in her clinical practice. And that spoke to me particularly because at the time that I read this, I was working on a piece of research in the Welsh Valleys in an ex-steel community where young men were, as I've described in this quote, playing out a kind of drama. That's how I came to see it. Because they described the ways in which they were forced, of course, away from hard industrial labour, because it didn't exist anymore in the town, into certain kinds of service work, pizza delivery, working in Tesco's, stacking shelves, all those kinds of things. And they were meeting a lot of problems because older people, both in their families and in the community, gave them a very, very hard time. You know, one guy worked as a contract cleaner, and the women cleaners referred to him as Mrs. Mop. Another young guy, his stepfather refuses to speak to him because he's wearing this Domino's pizza uniform, delivering a pizza, and not, of course, the heavy boots and the donkey jacket of a steel worker. Somebody else talks about having to work in a white coat in a supermarket and not getting dirty. And I started to try to put all these things together. And what I'm describing in this quote here from the book, which Luis Jimenez and I wrote about this work, something about the historical drama. So just as Davwan's research and engagement with her patient allows a historical drama to unfold, so there is a historical drama that's, in a sense, unwittingly played out by a set of players who, at one time or another, as I've said, enter the stage. Be they steel workers, housewives, cleaners, fathers, mothers, Mrs. Mops, Domino's pizza uniforms, supermarket white coats, worker donkey jackets, tired bodies, dirty faces, mummies, boys, gays and women, who are all figures or objects that appear in the narratives of the young men and others in the community. So I'm starting with this because of the way in which we can begin to see, very much in the way that Belinda was also talking about objects, that certain kinds of figures and objects start to appear. Now, in this way, I was doing, I wasn't doing performance work, but you can see a sort of a performative sense starts to emerge for me in this work. Well, then I started to try to get a bit braver and to bring the two aspects of my own work, the artwork and the social scientific work, together. So in Performing Abergavenny, which is an ongoing project, it only started in February, but that involves working with the people in Abergavenny, which is a town in South Wales, thinking about community cohesion across divides of class, locality and history. And it builds upon a project that was also funded by the AHRC, which I did with Neve and other people. So we're trying to think about how working with performance, both as performance art and a more theatrical sense of performance, allows us to engage with people across sites. So, for example, there's a much missed open-air swimming pool, and we're going to have a day performing the swimming pool. So we're going to recreate the sense of the lost swimming pool with paddling pools. We're hoping it's not going to rain. Paddling pools, and fire engines are going to come and fill the paddling pools, and we're going to have swimmers and other kinds of interventions. We're going to do some historical research on certain sites, and we're going to have a treasure hunt around those sites, as well as a whole set of other kinds of performance activities. And I must say that this so far has been incredibly exciting, because it's allowed the project team to engage in a broader way beyond doing interviews. Actually, making work with people has been enormously exciting. So I just want to show you, if I can get this to work, a tiny clip that I only got sent last night. So I want to get the screen small so I can bring up.
If you do escape, I'll do it. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh no, you're on here, so you'll need to do it on here. And then
thank you. Then I can bring this. So I only got this last night from the person who shot it. So hopefully it'll work. I'm just going to show you a little clip of the beginnings of this project, where an actor dressed as a woman from the 1950s who grew up in an area called Tudor Street, which was it was a very old Tudor street that was cleared in slum clearance in the 1950s, and the inhabitants were moved to the periphery of the town, and this has created a lot of issues across the town. And she's coming in and she's talking to passers-by in role about having come back, lost her memory, and she doesn't know anything beyond the 1950s.
That sounds idyllic. So you're saying kingfishers and San Martin. Sounds like a beautiful place.
This is another actor doing something else. I'm just coming to the clip I want to show you.
Stick to your roots, just stick to your historical town, or you just completely revamp the town and become something else.
And what about do you think there's going to be enough for the children to keep them here in the future, or do you see that?
No. Definitely not. At all.
Oh, it was a lovely place when I lived here. It still seems a lovely place today, though, doesn't it?
It is, yeah. It has its moments. It has
Does
its
it?
moments. Yeah. Phone shops, card shops, coffee shops.
There's hardly any little kids. You've got very a lot of kids.
I tell you what it is. It concentrates on trying to bring people into the town rather than keeping the people that already live here happy.
Yes.
That's what I think.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
It's too busy concentrating on bringing outside trade in rather than looking after the people that live here.
Yeah, and what about, lots of factories are closed, haven't they? Because I worked in the sweet factory, Kitty Clover. I mean, what jobs can you offer now then to people? What are they?
Nothing.
I mean, you're at the hospital. What are you, Sophie?
I don't work.
And what about your families? You got families that.
My mum has 2 jobs.
Does she?
But they're both outside of domestic because there's nothing here. My stepfather's just been laid off and trying to find a job. There's absolutely nothing. And my partner, he has been unemployed for 2 years. Can't find it.
It's difficult, isn't it?
It is really hard because, yeah, it's just nothing. There's nothing. I think unless you're in a job like you, they kind of stability, yeah. Then, you know, I mean, I'm dreading trying to go back to work because I just don't even know what I'm going to do. It's just nothing.
Okay, I'm just going to stop there and take this back to the...
5 minutes.
Oh. Why do I get it to come up?
What you have to get a slideshow.
Ah, yes. Thank you. Oh, I see. I was going to show you a clip from Gillian Wearing's Self-Made, but I think I would recommend this, which is a DVD made by the artist Gillian Wearing, in which she gets ordinary people she uses method acting techniques and gets them to develop a drama, which I think is very interesting work. And I was also going to show you this, but I don't think I've got time. Which I also want to recommend, Grace Schwinn. You can find it on the internet. Her work, Tenant, also engages with... she uses interviews, actually, and then creates a piece of performance art based around the memories of a man talking about his experience in Berlin in the Second World War. Okay, so let me move on to... did you say I'd got 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, bloody hell. Okay. Well, all right, I want to share with you a small part of my own work on intergenerational transmission, which uses film, performance, deep mapping and archival research to trace the story of my maternal grandmother's life. In approaching the issue of transmission, I worked both from the past and from my own present. As with previous work of mine, for example, artwork using photographs of myself as a child, I worked on through drawing, and I was able to produce theoretical work which would not have been possible from beginning with words. I do want to stress that as an important aspect of a method that we might think about. So it's not so much that I'm trying to push the artwork itself, but I want to engage with the sense of working on an image and how that itself requires a certain kind of not knowing, a willingness to explore, to go with what our bodies tell us, to go with what emerges as an association. I think these kinds of qualities are equally important whether one's making art, doing clinical work, or doing field work. Obviously, the objects of the work is different in the different traditions, but I do think that the kinds of embodied engagement, for me at least, are very similar. So I want to bear in mind that that some of the work that I'm going to show you couldn't have been attempted without a profound sense of listening to oneself that's, in my view, made possible by psychoanalytic work. Furthermore, the worked-on material can have a dialogic quality, which itself can be further worked on, say, obviously, in some kind of analytic session or other forms of bodywork dialogue. In other words, just as one works with doubles, so one can both dialogue with a character, in this case my grandmother, but also in conceiving a set of feelings, bodily experiences, memories, scenes. These can't only be reworked to produce an artwork, they can form the basis of a further dialogue, and thus treating them as associations which builds a bigger and greater picture. Or one can ask others to perform the character and see what's transmitted to them. I've used all these methods in the performative aspects of the work. In addition, I've undertaken a mapping using archival research online, and I've put some quotes about that here. In every case, when I've found an artefact, for example a death certificate, my understanding of my grandmother's life has changed dramatically, so I've had to keep reworking the story. What I thought I knew and the story I'd constructed shifts often in quite a profound way. So the aim of this is to understand the power of historical transmission. That's what I'm particularly interested in, as it's embodied, and to move beyond a pathologizing account. So I just want to introduce you quickly to my grandmother, Laura, who was born in 1895. I began with this photograph. I don't know when it was taken, except that it was taken in Blackpool. Blackpool Pleasure Beach, it says on the back. And so I began by trying to get into the same pose, which I found very difficult for various reasons. And then I got other people to perform the pose. This is Gabriel performing Laura. And here are some extracts from John performing Laura. He says, I found my attempt at empathising with her blotted out access to my feelings, and a day later this continues. And what you see in his text is that he has quite a lot of difficulty. He moves around between somebody who he has a relationship to and someone who he is. So his account moves around between the masculine and the feminine, himself and the other, in quite interesting ways. I then used method acting techniques, or as I understood them, probably not very well, to work through my own experience in relation to what I then thought I knew about the story of my grandmother, who in fact ran away from home with a married man. I thought that in many ways I hadn't got any sense of affinity with this until I started using this method acting technique. And of course what I uncovered were memories of stories that brought me far closer to the story of my grandmother than I'd imagined. This piece of work is built upon a memory of Gordon, one of my early boyfriends, and we engaged in what in those days, I'm terribly old, was called heavy petting. And his parents were out and came home, and I was taken home.
Well, we need to wait.
Okay. So I just want then to finish with these a couple of images here, which are starting the other way round. So, as I said, I started both from the historical aspect, the photograph of my grandmother, but I also started from my experience and tried to think, well, if something is transmitted to me, I don't know what it was, so what is my experience, and how can I work backwards through my experience to my mother and her experience to my grandmother. And this work comes from that. My mother had eczema, and this is an attempt to engage a piece of performance in which I'm attempting to engage with an experience of being bandaged and in pain and untouchable. Oops. Oh, you can't see this one very well. But that's also another version of it, and I'll end there. Thank you.